Is there anything you want to mention to people who have HIV who may feel isolated or depressed?
Well, I think people, especially long-term survivors who've been living with this disease for 20 and 30 years, need to remember and to honor what they've been through. It really is like going through a war. They've coined a term called AIDS survivor syndrome, which is really a form of PTSD, because if you know anything about the history of the epidemic, there was this mass die-offs in communities like San Francisco and LA and New York. Whole communities were literally decimated by this disease. And it was also at a very politically fraught time, which we're kind of re-experiencing today, where the Reagan administration was not addressing the disease at all. They even refused to say the name. And so people were dying by the tens of thousands, and it felt like nobody was doing anything. So that takes its toll, and people need to honor that and realize that this is part of their psychological history. And especially as they get older, many people are forced to move because they can't afford to live where they've lived for decades in places like San Francisco or LA because of housing prices. They have to move, they lose their community again, they have to start all over, and they may not have the resiliency as a result of all they've been through to kind of reinvent themselves in a new community. And on top of that, deal with the the aging comorbidities that they're experiencing. They're getting older just like everybody else, but in HIV, it tends to happen 10 to 15 years sooner. So they're experiencing things, a life they never expected to have, because most were told it was going to be a death sentence, and then B, they're experiencing aging, the illnesses of aging earlier than they expected. So it's not just a double whammy, it's a triple, quadruple whammy that people have to cope with, and they need to honor that and seek the help they need to deal with it, and recreate that sense of community like they did back in the day, so they can rely on each other once again to face what they're going through as they get older. What about you, Chris?
I would want to tell people not to be shy about reaching out to folks, and that there are people out there who've had similar experiences, who've had those breakthroughs that are waiting to engage with you. So, don't be afraid to put yourself out there, that there are people that are ready to engage, and especially if someone's isolated, there's a lot about giving of yourself that really helps you break out of that isolation. And one of the ways I helped do that was just by volunteering. It just helped me get out of that cycle of being alone, or then that would lead to depression.
What can the next generation of healthcare providers and public health advocates do to help people living with HIV?
I think for doctors especially, that they need to realize that they're dealing with a whole person and know the history that I was just talking about, that it's not just a collection of diseases and comorbidities, but that people have a history. And often, and I hear this from HIV providers all the time, is that they can deal with their HIV easily. They know how to treat their comorbidities, but they don't know what to do with people's sense of despair, isolation, depression. So they really need to deal with that. And if they're not qualified to do that, to make the right referrals, and service providers need to kind of create a holistic model. What we really need is a geriatric model, like we're doing for the boomer population. It should be doing. The problem is there aren't enough to go around. So we need to find creative ways to provide that for people. So I think both the medical providers, service providers, and the advocates need to get together and make sure that happens for people living with HIV.
And I would say almost the same thing, that I'm not my blood report, that I'm more than just the chemicals working well to suppress the HIV virus, that there are other things that come from that, even some medication reactions that a physician would need to be sensitive to and open to.
And we're coming to you live from Palm Springs, which is God's waiting room for people aging with HIV.